Hey, everybody. I know that I talk about the daily news cycle quite a bit, but I think it's important sometimes to step back and to look at some of these broader issues that operate under the surface of the daily news. So, yesterday, I introduced a survey here that the Public Religion Research Institute did in 2024 to study the support for Christian nationalism in the United States. And they released the survey in February, and I've just now had a chance to look it over the past couple of days. And it's pretty shocking in some ways, but I'll get to the shocking stuff in a bit when we get into some of the specific questions. But first, I do want to describe how the survey works. So in yesterday's video, we did sort of a fun exercise where we answered the 5 questions for ourselves that the survey asked in order to figure out how aligned a person might be with a Christian nationalist worldview. So if you didn't see that, I'd recommend that you watch that video if you want to see how the survey works. And now today, I want to talk about a few of the results, and I'll post a link to the entire survey below so you can dive in deeper yourself. But first, I do want to thank everyone who answered those 5 questions and posted your own scores in the comments. It was fun. I learned some things about this audience, and I think I confirmed a few things that I already knew. And a lot of you made me laugh, and that's really the most important thing. So that's a bonus. So thanks a lot for that. But I think several of you did express the same sorts of reservations that I have about any kind of survey like this if it's not used in the right way. I think those 5 questions can be open to interpretation, and they can tell us a lot about America, like in the aggregate. But I'd want to be super careful about using questions like that to put people into a hard and fast category based on just those 5 questions. I think they work best as a conversation starter rather than a way to categorize ourselves or anyone else. To my way of thinking, those questions get at some areas where we could engage, I think, in some serious talks with friends of ours just to see how they process these ideas. And I think that could lead to some really fruitful dialogue. So again, if you didn't watch that video, just check it out after this one. But what we'll see today is that those questions did get at a certain segment of the population when they were asked of 22,000 people. According to the survey results, in 2024, 3 in 10 Americans qualified as Christian nationalism adherents, 10%, or sympathizers, 20%. So that's 30% total of adherents or sympathizers, compared with 2/3 who qualified as skeptics, 37%, or rejectors, 29%. And these percentages have remained stable since PRRI first asked these questions in late 2022. So that's interesting, and I found that a little bit encouraging. I mean, on the one hand, if you've been around here a while, you know I'm just wired against Christian nationalist beliefs. And I came from a background where a lot of this stuff would have been more assumed. And so I've had to undo in my life a lot of my beliefs around these things. And so by now, though, I just have trouble believing that 30% of the country would line up that way. But I have to remember sort of where I came from. It's helpful to do that. And I was never all in that way. But I mean, I've had... in my circles, there's a lot more openness to this than what I have now, obviously. But on the other hand, 70% of the country is either skeptical of these beliefs or rejects them outright. And so I'm going to take some encouragement from that. So the survey laid out the distribution of people with Christian nationalist beliefs by state. And I'm just going to save everybody some time by saying they're exactly the states that you think they are. So, but it's when we get to a few of the other questions that things start to get a little dark. So you can read the article if you want to see all of this, because there's a lot of stuff I'm not going to get into here. But I want to focus on 4 specific findings that show me that those initial 5 questions, the ones that determine whether you're a Christian nationalist adherent or a rejecter or whatever, those questions seem to be pretty good indicators. We see some differences between the people who answer that way and the people who don't. So let's just start with immigration here. They asked people to agree or disagree with these questions about immigration. Number one, immigrants are invading our country and replacing our cultural and ethnic background. Number two, immigrants entering the country illegally today are poisoning the blood of our country. And number three, we should round up all immigrants who are in the country illegally, even if it takes setting up encampments guarded by the U.S. military. So the results are pretty shocking, if not totally surprising. Very high majorities of Christian nationalist adherents or sympathizers agreed with these, I think, reprehensible statements. And to my mind, it illustrates how dishonest these people are who try to tell me that it's only illegal immigration that they oppose. The first question says nothing about illegal immigration. It's about the effects of any immigration. Replacing our cultural and ethnic background is not a function of whether someone comes here legally or illegally. It's a function of whether they come here at all. And that's this racist great replacement theory. And as much as these people might want to insist that they're only against illegal immigration, when they answer confidential surveys, they tell us what's really going on in their hearts. And now, I'm not going to do a big explanation of why it's wrong and absurd for Christians to believe these things, just because I do that all the time on this channel. For today, I'm just pointing out what people believe from this survey data. It's the same with the poisoning the blood comment, of course. I mean, that's just straight up Germany in the 1920s and 30s rhetoric. And Donald Trump has repeated that rhetoric. So thanks for that, Donald. If you believe immigrants poison the blood of Americans, then it doesn't matter whether they come here legally or illegally. It's still poisoning the blood, right? It's just easier to admit that you think that if people give you the excuse of saying, well, they came here illegally. So then this question about rounding people up and putting them in military camps. I mean, just wow. If you really think it's a good idea to put people in camps because they're, I don't know, hurting our economy or whatever, then I'd suggest that we start with people who commit fraud, or people who profit off of insider trading, or get themselves elected by lying to the American people and selling out our government to the highest bidder. I mean, if we're putting people in camps, but I'm not for putting anybody in camps. But I don't know, people get offended by different things, I guess. So let's move on to another area here, patriarchy. This one had two statements that people could agree or disagree with. Number one, society as a whole has become too soft and feminine. And number two, society is better off when men and women stick to the jobs and tasks that they're naturally suited for. Now, if you look at these results, they're pretty interesting. I could be completely politically correct here and just trash on the Christian nationalists who obviously push for a more patriarchal society, but that would be a mistake. If you look at this data, this is pretty interesting, and I think it helps explain part of the reason why Democrats have struggled in recent years with young men. Even 46% of Christian nationalist skeptics and 18% of rejectors believe society has become too soft and feminine. And I mean, who knows what that even means? But I think it's getting at a feeling that a lot of people have that is at least worth addressing. You know, we could look at this in a few different ways. And I understand why someone might say, well, all this shows is that misogyny runs deep, even among people who aren't Christian nationalists. And I get that, maybe. But I've learned a bit from Scott Galloway recently, who talks about this sort of thing quite a bit. And he's a center-left kind of a guy. And he's certainly an opponent of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. And he's been warning for a while that America is failing its young men. And he's been trying to get his people, the Democrats, to pay more attention to that problem because young men are getting pulled into the manosphere and they're getting radicalized by MAGA types. So obviously, I'm opposed to the way patriarchal Christians would frame up these issues, and I'm opposed to most of their solutions. But it's helpful data to look at a survey like this and to recognize that a broad cross-section of Americans feel like something is going on, even if they don't know exactly what it is or how to express it on a survey. And I just think it's worth looking into that more. So for today, though, let's just move on to the most disturbing questions about political violence. So question 1, because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. And question 2, if the 2024 presidential election is compromised, so this was taken just before the election, by voter fraud, everyday Americans will need to ensure that the rightful leader takes office, even if it requires taking violent actions. And question 3, armed citizens are needed as poll watchers to ensure a fair election. So on the one hand, it's good, I guess, that the numbers are lower for these questions, but my gosh, we're talking about a third of people who identify in some way with a Christian nationalist worldview believe that violence might be necessary to save our country from their political opponents. And that's just disturbing beyond measure. And despite the fact that Fox News and other right-wing outlets want to pretend that Antifa or some other left-wing movement poses the same kind of violent threat, the survey data just doesn't bear that out. The people in America who are most inclined to believe that political violence might be necessary call themselves conservative Christians, and that's chilling. And then finally, I think the goofiest question of them all, but also the saddest in some ways, is basically the QAnon question. I was pretty shocked by this one. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The government, media, and financial worlds in the U.S. are controlled by a group of Satan-worshiping pedophiles who run a global child sex trafficking operation. Now, I would expect that the people who would answer yes to this would be like Marjorie Taylor Greene and a handful of people who are off their meds. But 50% of the people who align with a Christian nationalist worldview, based on those 5 questions that we went over yesterday, say they believe this. And I mean, I just have to say it. Those are the people that I'm never going to be able to reach through books or YouTube videos. Those are the ones who need, I think, one-on-one, patient, pastoral counseling, psychological counseling, friends. You know, there's hope for people who are locked into that mindset, but it's a long-term loving process. As someone that they trust, walking alongside them and helping them to do some hard work of just slowly over time reframing their entire understanding of reality. And that's not what I'm able to do on this channel. But I hope to offer resources for people who want to do that sort of work. But what I'm doing here is I'm trying to head off more of that stuff. So let me put it this way. I did some quick math on this. My quick math tells me that if 10% of American adults identify as adherents to Christian nationalism, and 50% of them believe in this insane conspiracy, then that's 5% of all U.S. adults who believe that. And then further, if 20% of American adults are sympathizers with Christian nationalism, and 32% of those sympathizers believe this stuff, and that's another 6% of the population. So 11% of the American population, according to this survey of 22,000 people, are Christian nationalist adjacent types who believe in this utterly insane and dangerous theory. So I've got to ask, whose fault is that? Whose fault is that? Okay, I'm not going to let them off the hook. On some level, of course, it's their fault. But aside from that, whose fault is it? The easiest thing in the world would be for me to sit here and say that it's Donald Trump's fault, because obviously he's winked at this QAnon stuff and any other kind of conspiracy theories. He's winked at these people that believe them and that are sharing them, and he's elevated them, and he's spread some of their theories over the years. So yes, Donald Trump is at fault for this, but really, whose fault is Donald Trump? The reason Donald Trump has the platform that he's had to inject this kind of insanity into his Christian followers for almost 10 years now is because Christian leaders have propped him up against the wellness of their followers. And that's what I've warned about for so many years now in 2 books, a couple of 100 videos. This is why I talk about this stuff. This is why the subtitle to my 2020 book, MAGA Seduction, was Resisting the Debasement of the Christian Conscience. This is what it looks like when the conscience of an entire movement gets traded in for temporary political power. You end up with millions of people who are only going to get better with intensive help from their loved ones. America's blood is not being poisoned. It's our minds that are being poisoned. And now Trump has 4 more years to do that. And I've said it many times, I like Sting's quote, "They go crazy in congregations, they only get better one by one." The work I'm doing here is not that one by one thing. It's trying to head off any more of these large-scale assaults on the conscience of Americans, especially Christian Americans, by speaking truth and standing up to the liars who benefit by making people a little bit less emotionally healthy every day. So those are politicians, but they're also religious leaders like Robert Jeffress and Franklin Graham. None of these people, none of those leaders believe this conspiracy theory stuff, but they find it convenient to support the people who spread it. And for that, they're going to have to give an account to history and their maker. But in the meantime, this survey tells me that we've all got a lot of work to do. But it also tells me that we're not alone. The majority of the country isn't falling for this stuff, and we can't forget that. So let's keep focusing on trying to share the truth and to help our own loved ones as much as we can to escape from some of these unhealthy and destructive belief systems. So thanks for caring about this stuff, and thanks for listening.